Okay, welcome to February's Islandora webinar, where we will be highlighting the UMKC Digital Special Collections. I'm joined today by Sandy Rodriquez. She's the Digital Special Collections Coordinator at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. We're going to be hearing from Sandy a little later on. So before we get into today's content, I just want to let you know that we will do a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. If you have questions, please type them into the chat option. So there should be a little icon that looks like a speech bubble at the top of your screen, and you can direct your text to everyone or just to me. So the option is yours, and we'll hear from Sandy. She'll be available to answer your questions related to her project, or if you have general questions related to Islandora, you can ask those to me. So today's content, it's going to be first starting with an overview of the Islandora software and community, and then we'll be speaking to Sandy. And Sandy is going to be highlighting the Special Collections project that they just recently launched. So we're going to do a very quick high-level overview of Islandora for folks who are new to the software platform. Essentially, Islandora is made up of a stack of open source technologies. The three main components that are best known or most popular are Drupal, Apache Solr, and Fedora Commons. Now, these three main components of the stack are used for different things. Drupal, of course, is used to expose our digital content to the web, so it's for presentation. And it's also for collaboration. Drupal has a terrific framework for users, roles, and permissions. And we can integrate this kind of collaborative framework into workflow-related tasks. Apache Solr is used primarily for search and discovery. It has terrific multilingual capability, and it is extremely powerful. We index all kinds of information into Apache Solr for discovery. So this isn't just descriptive metadata, it's also technical metadata, relationship information. So Apache Solr is an extremely powerful search and discovery layer in Islandora. So essentially anything that's ingested into a digital repository is discoverable. Now the third component is Fedora Commons. It is the repository software, and it's used for storage and preservation. At its core, Islandora really is a group of Drupal modules, and they enable us to create digital repositories on top of Fedora Commons. So these modules make it easy for us to ingest content, to expose content in many different ways. Some of these modules, they're called solution packs. You may have heard of them before, and they act as templates or recipes for preserving and exposing different types of digital content. Now, customization is quite common in the Islandora framework, although not necessary. There are a lot of organizations out there that use Islandora out of the box, and that means without customization. But we would say that the most common use case is that people use about 80% standard functionality, and they customize about 20%. Now, the most common things that folks customize would be XML metadata entry forms. So creating XML forms that match your metadata profile, that makes a lot of sense. There are different metadata profiles for lots of different projects and lots of different institutions. Another common customization would be workflow. So let's say you needed a method for mediated deposit. Let's say you wanted faculty, students, or volunteers to deposit into the repository, but you wanted a really streamlined and simple way to do that. So you can create workflow steps or workflow modules in order to facilitate that. The third type of very common customization would be integration with external services or external systems. So if you were integrating with an ERP, maybe a collections management software, so integration with external services is also very common. And that would be common in the context where Islandora is one part of a digital curation strategy. So in essence, Islandora, it really is a framework of open source technologies, and they help you expose and preserve digital content. It is standards-based, and that means that it adheres to the OAIS reference model, and we also support standards-based descriptive metadata like mods and DC. It stores data in an interoperable format. That means that you can take your data from Islandora and it will be available to you in an intelligible format that you can put in other different software. And it's also harvestable. We have a really simple Islandora OAI module. It's really easy to enable and configure, and it can make your repository content harvestable. So an aggregator can go out and grab your metadata for additional discovery. So now a quick overview of the community. Now the people make the software even stronger. So Islandora has been around for 10 years, hard to believe. It launched in 2006 at the University of Prince Edward Island. But the overall fostering of the Islandora community, it changed from the university. Hi there. For those who have just joined, I'd please ask you to mute your microphone. So since 2013, the Islandora Foundation, a nonprofit entity, has been fostering the Islandora community. And it's really done a wonderful job. Since 2013, the foundation has been able to facilitate 2 code releases annually, and they come out in May and October. So here's a quick visual on the Islandora community. These are installations worldwide. You can see that the big clusters are in North America and Europe, but we are seeing more and more installations in other jurisdictions as well. Now, users in the Islandora community have changed over time, over the last 10 years. The community really started with a group of innovative organizations that were interested in and hungry for new technology and all of the other things that come with that, like risk and bugs and all of that. But these innovative organizations that first started implementing Islandora, they really did the rest of us a favor because they were the ones that were really responsible for the stable and feature-rich software that we have today. So over time, and with more and more implementations of Islandora, we did see that the software was improving both in stability and scalability, and it's a lot easier to maintain and sustain. So supporting the Islandora framework is a lot easier for organizations today than it was 5 to 8 years ago. So with the improvement to the software and also with the emergence of service providers, we've now seen the typical Islandora implementing organization change from big organizations with big budgets to more smaller organizations with maybe few or no technical staff. Excuse me, I had to get a sip of water there. And so where does Discovery Garden fit in? Essentially, we're a small services company launched in 2010, and it was the result of a commercialization project out of the University of Prince Edward Island. We have been a partner in the Islandora Foundation since it started in 2013, and we really see our role as removing barriers to implementing Islandora or removing barriers to implementing open source software. We have really committed an awful lot of code to the Islandora community as a whole, over 90%, and a lot of that is due to the big rewrite of code in the transition from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7. But we will eventually see that percentage come down, and it's not because our contributions will lessen, but simply because the contributions of other community members are now increasing at a pretty impressive rate. So now I have the pleasure of introducing Sandy Rodriquez of the University of Missouri, Kansas City. This is really what you all have been waiting for. So Sandy, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. I'll hand the floor over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, and thanks to everyone for being here. Just a little bit about myself. I'm the Digital Special Collections Coordinator here at UMKC, and I've been in this position for 3 years now, but prior to working with our digital collections, I was heavily involved in a couple of cataloging grant projects for our sound archive. So my background is actually primarily as a music and AV cataloger. So again, about 3 years ago, I moved from our technical services department to our special collections department to take on managing our digitized materials that had been created over a number of years, enhancing the metadata, which consisted of this really simple, unstandardized data sets in just a Microsoft Access database, and bringing up a repository for these materials, which also entailed the migration of many digital objects from a legacy system. So keep in mind that I had no prior relevant experience working with digital collections, but I did have, this very strong interest and skills that could be developed over time. So it was really a huge undertaking for me personally. However, move to the next slide. It's important to understand that UMKC is part of the University of Missouri system, which consists of 4 very distinct universities with their own strengths and identity. So MU in Columbia is the flagship public land grant research institution. In Rolla, their focus is science and technology. And actually, Rolla is the one university that did not participate in Islandora, but they might in the future. And then the 2 universities in the 2 major metropolitan areas in the state, St. Louis and Kansas City. The group participating in our Islandora project in St. Louis is the Mercantile Library. And here in Kansas City, we're really focused on our special collections, our sound archive, and we also have the Gay and Lesbian Archive of Mid-America here. So the libraries themselves have a long history of shared technologies, initiatives, and expertise with each other. So we have a shared institutional repository, dark archive, and we also have this committee, these coordinated efforts by committee that have oversight over some of these initiatives. But a lot of the work that actually happens in the recommendations actually come from the working groups. Move to the next slide. So actually, about the time I joined our system level digital projects committee, the decision to move to Islandora had already been made. So I wasn't actually part of that process, but my understanding is that, our DLXS instance was on a server that was no longer warranted. That system was outdated and it was difficult to maintain. So at the time, if we needed to make any kind of change, even just to the metadata, or if we wanted to ingest new collections, we'd have to submit a ticket. So this centralized process was not ideal at all. It's a huge burden on our library systems technology staff. And at the same time, it left us feeling completely out of control. What we wanted was a distributed environment where each campus could take control of the ingest process, we could control our display and design, and no one was competing for, prioritizing collections for ingest, something that could be customized and built upon. So in that sense, Islandora was very competitive. But there was also this look at, how maybe we can build out our D space. Ultimately, that group decided that, Islandora was more feature rich, offered the distributed workflows that would help us increase our efficiency, while at the same time giving us a sense of control over our digital collections. And at the time, although it's not true now, DSpace hadn't yet integrated media players. And we were generally impressed by the developer community and that there was this avenue for pursuing training and assistance through discoverygarden. So it was ultimately a really good fit for us. And just briefly about our project phases at UMKC. First, I should step back and say that probably, I think it was the summer of 2013, the shared technology office that we have, library systems, did contract with Discovery Garden to do a clean install of Islandora and set us up as a multi-site configuration where we were sharing the same Fedora but separate Drupal layers. And at that same time, we formed a working group focused on learning and getting us to a launch point. However, I would personally describe that process of learning as quite overwhelming, and I felt like we were a bit aimless at times. So it wasn't until we at UMKC contracted with Discovery Garden for our theming and metadata configuration contract that we really got a firmer grasp on Islandora. And at that time, Discovery Garden hadn't developed these nice service bundles that we have today. So we did just a custom contract with them at the beginning of 2014. And we were able to pay for it by a local grant that we had received. And ultimately, the most valuable unanticipated outcome we got out of working with Discovery Garden was just how much we ended up learning about Islandora itself. So in phase 2, our primary goal was to migrate our collections from our legacy system as a sort of pilot project that would help us hammer out workflows, help us build metadata application profiles, generate some training documents, and just offer a set of collections that would get us to a launch point, which is where we are now. So I'll go into this a little more later, but the reason we opted not to go with a migration contract is, well, first, we didn't have the funds, and the other, we did end up purchasing a support contract so we could have direct access to Discovery Garden. But the other reason is, you know, I quickly realized this wasn't a straightforward migration with a mapping process. I had discovered that the metadata in our legacy system was wholly inadequate. So phase 2 actually involved a huge metadata enhancement process as well. And I'll talk about that more in a bit. Phase 3, what we're looking at now, is evaluating how we can scale and sustain the repository programs, but I'll discuss that more later. So this is our site. We didn't launch with a huge set of stuff, but we launched with an incredibly rich set of mostly images. There's some sheet music as well that is pretty reflective of the kinds of things that we curate here. So the original design was done by Discovery Garden based on a set of specifications we gave them, but we've tweaked it a bit since that time. We really wanted some very simple things. We wanted a simple, clean design that would facilitate search and browse. And we had these browse by collections here because it mirrors how users navigate through our website as well. And we'll be transitioning that a bit in the next year or so. And we also wanted more control over our metadata display, which I'll discuss more in detail later. So this is just a sampling very quickly from our collection. It was really difficult to choose items because there's so much great material, but we do have a lot of jazz and political posters, you know, Kansas City jazz. And the woman in the top center is a female bodybuilder, Ada Ash, and this is from our Alan Bell collection. Alan Bell was a Kansas City promoter for entertainers and owned a booking and management agency. So there's lots of like very famous people, some not so famous, but a lot of great publicity shots in that collection. And then we have our sheet music imprints from Kansas City that are just a really rich source of historical significance and context. Of course, we got many of these unfortunate caricatures, but that really were reflective and captured, you know, the time. And, you know, political, there's Robert F. Kennedy in the upper right-hand corner, his campaign visit to Kansas City, and a number of images of local Kansas City. This in the bottom right-hand corner is from the Joseph Redmond collection. And there are many other collections of images of, you know, local spots in Kansas City. And this is the Uptown Theater, which is still here today. So just a quick look at our collections view. This was one of those fortunate developments that we stumbled upon. It was a highly desired to be able to expose facets by that were relevant just to a particular collection when a user navigated to that collection. and that was something that had been developed, and we just discovered the configuration, or, we kind of keep on top of what's going on. And this is the Dave Dexter collection, but this collection actually wasn't part of the legacy migration. The reason it was included in this phase of the project is because it's one of the most highly used collections we have, highly requested. So we decided to just include that. But it's pretty simple. We just wanted, a thumbnail image and just, brief information about the collection, and then facets, and then the objects themselves. And this is an image from the Dave Dexter collection. It's one of my favorite images. Just under the title, you can see a set of icons. And this is an example where we used the skills of our programmer in library systems to help take what was this kind of weird, to us weird anyway, clip icon feature and parse out, the download and the print and the share link. And we worked with our graphic designer here at UMKC to design the icon so that it fit within the theme of our site. And so this is what I was alluding to before about this not being a simple mapping process. So the metadata below the image was what was in our legacy system. It was basically taken directly from that set of simple unstandardized data in the Microsoft Access database. This is stuff that, students had put in over time, or staff. But, of course, we felt really strongly about building a metadata-driven repository so that we could optimize discovery and access to our collections, and felt, this was our opportunity to address that, which is why the process has been much more time-consuming. So we went through this enormous effort of enhancing metadata with just one student working about 10 to 15 hours a week. And thankfully, in this past June, our digitization tech was added to the project, and I've trained him to enhance metadata. And we were able to poach a portion of 2 of our special formats catalogers' staff time to devote time to that as well more recently. So in our contract with Discovery Garden, we wanted more granular control over display on various types of content. For instance, for image class objects, they could be photographs, posters, graphics, and where we might say photographer for photographs, we'd say participating organization for posters, because a lot of the posters were sponsored by a particular organization or were for some event. So Discovery Garden cloned the large image content model for our image class categories, and then enhanced the Solar Metadata Display module to base the displays off of the content models. So they also added this configurable hyperlinked values so that dynamic searches could be performed similar to the functionality you find in catalogs, right? So these enhancements were contributed back to the community as a regular feature of the Solar Metadata Display module. And that's when we, or at least I, felt the first thrill of being part of an open source project. It was really exciting for us. So I did say I would talk about challenges, the major challenges for us, and there's really 2, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. And one of them was just a lack of experience, and in general, the learning curve for working with an open source repository, especially having a technical knowledge base and those skills, and the other being a lack of dedicated resources. In addressing that first challenge, I can elaborate a bit on how we went about learning. As I said before, working with Discovery Garden was immensely helpful in getting us over that hurdle of understanding. I felt anyway that the time for learning was greatly expedited by working with them on this project. And again, we continue to have access to them through our support contract. We had some professional service hours for a specific task of developing a view for restricted objects for us. And then, we did as best as we can. We leveraged what access we had in the system to be able to work together with our monthly digital library working group meetings. We also have ticket review meetings every month, and we started this Islandora retreat because it was kind of like a support group in a way, like where we came together physically in Columbia, which is central in the state, and we shared things about what we had learned. At least in the first retreat, we kind of stumbled through the form builder together, but it's now become an annual thing. And then the other great thing about working as a group is, you know, we don't have a lot of resources, but we did have this opportunity to present a unified voice to, you know, say, please send Phil Redman, our programmer, to the Islandora Camp, and that was has been hugely beneficial. And then the community itself, you know, I'm more of a lurker than an active participant, but I'm hoping to change that in the future. But these are immensely valuable resources for learning, and in general, you know, the people in this community are really friendly and approachable. So for phase 3, it's really kind of addressing the other major challenge for us, which is the lack of committed resources. So as part of our scaling and sustainability effort, we are looking to clearly define roles and consider how we can align resources to create a well-supported program for, you know, delivering our unique assets and maintaining them over time. So fortunately, as I made mention before, we do have access to Phil, who's this programmer in our centralized library systems office, but you know, he's able to devote like a fluctuating percentage of his time to Islandora because he has many other responsibilities as well. We're also looking to ingest more diverse content, in particular audio, which we'll be working more closely with our sound archive on that. And in terms of more discovery platforms, we just made our collections available through our summon here, and we are participating in the Digital Public Library of America through Missouri Hub, so I can tell you the OAI module is great and it works. And then, you know, we've been able to get more metadata support here at UMKC, and I do actually have access to someone who is knowledgeable about our collections and can do some CSS for our site so we can implement some design changes. But we also have this other opportunity about maybe more than 2 years ago, I think the libraries created a user-centered design department. Right now they're mostly focused on website redesign and implementing tools to support our work. But just yesterday, actually, the usability team had finished up and gave us a report. They did a heuristics test to identify like the big boulders with the site. And they're now passing that on to the design team, which is 2 people, to build you know, better design. And we're just hoping basically to add a better process for, you know, improving design and adding functionality. And finally, we are hoping to assess our digital preservation efforts and build in more robust practices. A lot of this has more to do with our pre-ingest workflows than the product itself, but we actually will be looking at Islandora and kind of assessing that, and maybe we're not using it to its fullest capability in terms of digital preservation and what we want to do. And on the system level, we have formed a digital preservation planning group to try to build policies and kind of assess our practices currently and have a more streamlined and process. So the next slide. Oops. And, you know, finally addressing both of those challenges, the lack of resources and just continued learning, is our plan to host Islandora Camp. So for us, this is a really low-cost, high-value endeavor. We can get much broader participation amongst the UM libraries if we host it here, because, you know, previously, as I said, we've only had Phil going. So I'm personally looking forward to adding another layer of learning by participating in some hands-on workshops. So that's all I have. But before we turn it over to Q&A, I do want to thank some people. start thinking about your questions. All the folks at Discovery Garden, actually Erin in particular, because she was our project manager for our theming and configuration contract, and was incredibly knowledgeable and just made it really easy for us to get through that. And we were really happy with the end product. And just want to thank the staff working on this project at UMKC, the University of Missouri Digital Library Working Group, in particular Phil Redman, the programmer, and also Stuart Hines, our Assistant Dean of Special Collections and Archives here at UMKC, who's always a great supporter and advocate and is really great at getting money. So thank you.
No, that's wonderful. I think wonderful job on the presentation, and so good to hear about another repository launched. We do have a couple of questions, and for anyone who thinks of a question while we're going through the first couple, please type it into the instant message or the chat window, and we'll try to get to all the questions. If we don't, we can always send out questions and answers by email later. So the first question, what was the response to the launch? I know that you launched just last month, right?
Oh, right, yes. Yeah, we captured some of our, well, we turned on the usage stats module, and we also, aligned we had our Google Analytics module enabled, but then we went into Google Analytics. We have an account here with the UMKC libraries and got it incorporated into that. And we saw a huge spike in the number of users. It's actually been out there for a long time. We just didn't promote it. So, but we've definitely gotten a lot more users to it. We've had a lot more traffic coming to our site. And then because I did add, we added a kind of feature where people, if they had more information about a particular image, like when we have a lot of unidentified people, and as many people do, and so we had built in this kind of contact where it would grab the PID or the persistent identifier and then email me, and the person would tell me, it's actually this person, and I'd go through a system of verification and enhance the metadata. So that's actually been a really nice response from the launch as well. It's just improving the metadata that we have. Yeah, I just think in general that people are using, it's far more usable than our legacy system, which is kind of on its last legs, and like we can't even search for a title. some of that, I don't know, they're not maintaining it anymore, so we're just trying to move everything over as quick as possible.
Right. A question came in about migration. So I think we could do a two-part answer. You talked a little bit about the migration and how metadata cleanup was a pretty enormous part of that. Do you want to talk about your specific experience, and then I'll talk a little bit about migrations in general?
Sure. So, I mean, they're asking about the contract, but I will tell you what we did, which is, and now I'm forgetting who it was. Somebody out there had, put this, I think it was from the folks from Colorado. Somebody there had posted this thing about, getting your spreadsheet to mods XML, and we basically took that and adjusted it for our purposes, and I built a profile where I specify, it's a basic metadata application profile where I specify the standards to use. I trained my student and later staff to do that work, and then we just go through a process of transforming that spreadsheet data to mods XML, a large aggregated mods XML record, and then use a parsing script so that we could, do the batch ingest where, the object has its metadata, and then we could just do that all en masse. So that was really helpful to us. The other thing that we had, it was our sheet music collection, which we're still currently working on, which we actually did have MARC records for the original, like the original paper source. But of course, we're wanting to have metadata that describes the digital surrogate. So I went through a process of transforming that to mods XML and then just using Oxygen, just doing cleanup as globally as I could. And now there are a few things where we wanted to take advantage of the faceted display. So we are kind of touching each one, just like specific things that we're doing with, putting genres in the mod genre and subject topical and subject names, breaking that out, and just making sure we get it into describing the digital resource itself. So that's been taking a bit longer, but it's we use the Drush batch ingest process for that for books. So it's tedious and time consuming what we're having to do, but we are providing a lot better discovery and access to our materials by enhancing that metadata.
Yeah, and I mean, the process that you guys have gone through is really similar to what we do. We kind of do migrations at Discovery Garden in two different phases. So the first is normally an assessment, and it normally is a 3-day small project where we do two things. We do a custom script that will essentially do a forensic review of your data. And by data, I mean a sample set of approximately 10%. And then we do a review of requirements. So this is assuming that a requirements gathering process has already taken place. If it hasn't, some people do ask us to assist in the requirements gathering process. So after the assessment bit, we have a really good idea of what the migration is going to entail. So we've confirmed a bunch of assumptions. We've defined requirements, expectations, and then we move on to the next phase, which is actually doing the migration. And for large ingests, we typically do recommend a scripted migration. So it means writing a script that will ingest directly into Fedora. So this is not an ingest through the Drupal user interface. So these scripts we use, like Sandy had mentioned, it's a shell scripting language called Drush. So it's spelled D-R-U-S-H. And it interacts with the Islandora Took API and the Islandora batch processes. So essentially, we're able to create these scripts. They're not reusable scripts, but because we're using Drush, the commands are reusable. So it's a much more sustainable way to create an ingest process. And then essentially, we iterate on it. So we'll create the script based on the things that we've learned in the assessment. We'll run the migration on an internal server that we've set up, and then we'll review it, see what went right, see what went wrong, and then make changes to the script. And sometimes we can expect to run a migration 4 or 5 times before we're completely satisfied with the way the content comes over. So we see migrations as an iterative process, and often migrations are very unique. They're unique based on your content, your metadata profile, and then the expectations of cleanup, mapping to other schemas, and the like. So migrations can be very different for every organization. I hope that answer was helpful, but we can follow up after. One of the next questions, Sandy, was about how you enforce metadata schema standards. So how do you guys go about doing that?
Probably not in the most efficient way. I basically review all of the spreadsheets, but actually by using OpenRefine, I'm able to do that a little less like record by record. So because it kind of counts the number of occurrences of a particular term or whatever, and so I can verify it. and does some cleanup in that way. But I also know OpenRefine does have reconciliation services, but I haven't actually done that. I've got a number of flags in my email where it's like, I'm going to get there. That's the next step, because that would greatly improve my ability to kind of review the metadata that's provided by the student I have working for me and the staff. So that's how I do it.
All right, great. And another way that people go about doing this is, I mean, they'll decide on a standard schema, and then they'll customize the metadata ingest and editing forms to that metadata profile. So whether you're starting out in one schema and then mapping to another, or if you're starting out in one and keeping that schema, whether it's DC, mods, PB core, and what have you, it is fairly, I shouldn't call it easy. I don't know, Sandy, if you would agree, it's easy to create custom XML forms. But there is a tool available in Islandora called the XML Form Builder. And essentially, it does give people the opportunity to copy existing forms, because forms come with an installation, and then you can edit them to match your profile, so that anytime someone ingests in the future, they're going to have that form that you created there available to them to ingest data. And the forms, you know, you can create drop-down lists, like to assist in avoiding the opportunity or avoiding the situation where you could have human error. So you can have drop-down lists, type aheads, and that incorporated into forms as well.
Yeah, I should add that in terms of the XML itself, that with OpenRefine, I use the transform option for exporting, and actually this speaks to, is this information available on that question. It goes back to that blog post that had, and I, you know, basically adapted what they did, where they had this kind of XSLT with the JSON that maps to your column headings, so that you build the XML record, just a generic XML record that is pertinent to your that particular collection or that spreadsheet, in each column heading, as long as it's unique, would map. You would put in this JSON to map it to the place in the hierarchy that it needs to be, and then use the OpenRefine transform to do that for you. I know other people do like just a straight XSLT for spreadsheet to whatever, you know, in like Oxygen or whatever, but I haven't done that.
Yeah, and we typically will use XSLTs. Yeah, and I think too, I mean, there are a lot of tools out there, and people should use the tools that they're comfortable with. I mean, in the case of mapping metadata and really modeling data in general, there are a million ways that you could go about really getting your data in good shape. And I feel like people shouldn't feel an obligation to learn a new language, learn a new tool, because this is what most people use. I mean, give it a try in the tools that you're comfortable with. And if it doesn't go, you know, as planned, then you can look outside and say, okay, well, most people on the Islandora listserv are using this tool, so I'm going to give it a try. And where there are a bunch of people using it already, my odds of getting support through the listserv are pretty good. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different methods that people can go about doing it.
Yeah, and I think we can, if anyone wants to email me, I can send you, or Aaron, I can send you the link to like that presentation. I think it was actually at the Islandora Camp in Colorado about the drush process. And then, and also a link to that blog post that kind of, I just sat at a coffee shop one day and just like kind of carefully read through it, and then looked at the XSLT and I was like, oh, I get it, you know. And we can definitely send that if you want to contact me or Aaron.
Yeah, I just put our contact information up on the screen there. So I think we have time for just one more question. Sandy, if you had, you know, one piece of advice for someone who is at the start of this process? And I know that this could be tough to choose just one, but what would it be? What one piece of advice would you give?
I would generally say most people are, I mean, there are some people that are incredibly experienced with this, but I would say allow yourself to be overwhelmed for a moment, but then just sit down and plan. You should just, focus on the discrete steps. I mean, it's easy to be really overwhelmed. There's a lot of, I think that this product is designed very well, but there's also a lot of tools that are part of this product or plugged into this product. So it can be really overwhelming. And then there's the metadata and all of these various, things you have to think about, digital preservation. And so I think just, sitting down and taking the time to plan that, and then really being able to focus and prioritize and focus on some discrete steps. And then, I know this is more than one thing, but in general, just remembering that you could, think about what resources you could leverage, and try your best to do that if you're faced with the issue that we have, which is a lack of resources. And then, in general, the more experience you get, I think the better position you're in to be able to justify more resources, or, I think the progress that you make can, and the products that you have can, and how your users are actually being, successful in doing their research, reusing your content could help build a case that you can articulate. So, in general, just, planning is huge. Yeah, so.
No, I just want to say thank you so much, Sandy. We always really love having people who are working in institutions, working hands-on day-to-day with Islandora, participating in these webinars. I think it's so interesting to hear about the challenges at the organizational level and how you have overcome them. So, on behalf of everyone who participated today, which is just under 50 people, thank you so much for joining us and for speaking about your project.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to share.
So we have recorded this webinar, and we will be distributing the recording to all people who have registered, and we'll also be tweeting it out probably later on today or tomorrow. So again, thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Bye, guys.
Bye.